I think we're good. Hey, it's letting my hair down because I feel like I need to. Um, hey guys, happy, what is it, Monday? It's Monday, not Wednesday. It's Monday. Hello, all. Happy Monday. Uh, Welcome to class, I guess. I had somebody email and I was like, oh, I should probably fill you in, asking any updates on the, Dean Cain business. So, yeah, nothing. And sure enough, I think actively afterwards it kind of proved my point too. That literally got traffic afterwards, still getting it, even after posting a video explaining. And people were still posting comments like, this guy doesn't know what acting is, and things like that. I think I will say my favorite two things. One, did in fact get like a surge of viewership to that Anarchy live stream. So apparently a lot of people now know what Anarchy is apart from just you guys. So yeah, the reason why I didn't post the video before, I was debating it, and the reason I didn't want to post it before was because of the amount of traffic. Like I said, I listed it off, and of the amount of traffic, I was worried it would be bombarded with, like, during that live stream, if a bunch of people tuned in that weren't students. I was like, I didn't want to mess with it. So but got a bunch of hits afterwards, which was kind of funny. Lost one subscriber, which kind of made me laugh because YouTube, I'm not a streamer, so I usually upload things that are to aid in my classes. So that specific live stream lost me a subscriber. And then on Twitter, probably one of the funniest things that happened was I had someone that had gone through and commented on a bunch of my old tweets. Like, they had opened up and then like read a bunch of stuff and read a Twitter thread I started about the 4th of July, and posed some questions and was like just commenting on everything in the Twitter thread. And I had linked to a message, sermon, whatever you want to call it, that I wrote last year, a year ago. And it was, oh yeah, the chat would have been interesting. That's why I was like, I don't want to deal with that. It was so funny because the timestamps were these angry tweets at me for my Twitter thread about 4th of July. And then then it just went, that was actually a good read though. So like that individual opened up my website, read my 4th of July message after all of the angry tweeting at me, and then was like, yo, but that was kind of good though. That was kind of a good, you wrote really well. And I was like, I don't know if this is sarcastic or not. So sure enough, it's died down. I faded back into obscurity, just the way I like it. All right, so we left off with a whole bunch of justice sort of stuff, questioning what's just. And I think the thing is before we can even get into that, we need to discuss, or at least be reminded, America was built on an idea, right? In all honesty, the best way to describe its formation is that it was an experiment. America's formation was an experiment. Nobody had any idea whether it was going to work or not. I mean, like a self-governing country. America's formation was an experiment. Its foundation is that it began as an experiment. Hence, that always and continued striving, progressing. It started as an experiment and thought we always can do better. We always can strive. America's foundation was always about progressing for a more perfect union. So I think to say make America better doesn't mean you think America isn't great. It means it could always be greater. Make America greater. Imagine if that was the slogan. We'd have to face and accept its shortcomings. But to say, make America greater or make America better, doesn't make you unpatriotic. I think it's what makes you a patriot. Again, in order to form a more perfect union. What if that was the slogan? Make America a more perfect union. I'm glad that you think of Rawls and Rolf the dog. I do every time. I don't, this class isn't about teaching what I think. It's just me sharing the material in a weird way, and part of it we'll get into, but like, yeah. But I want, like, there's weird things that it's just like, it's like inside jokes. And so if every time, every semester, I'm teaching ethics, and we get to John Rawls, and I'm like, I'm Rolf the dog! I just want everybody else to think of it too, because then I don't feel so weird. Anyway, so let's get into the privilege problem. But first, who follows the law? The law. And does following the law make you free? Well, that not only depends on how you define freedom, but ultimately when in history we're talking here. Can you still follow the law and fear for your life? And is living in that fear the trade-off for being free? What if you're constantly afraid that even though you follow the law and, let's say, even go so far as to strive to maintain the status quo, you're constantly in fear that your freedom may still be taken away from you? A lot of people have said, and there wasn't a direct statement like this in the discussion board. I think you guys were really chewing on some heavy stuff. But a lot of people have said, well, if you want freedom, you just have to follow the law. Okay. So let's look at pre-civil rights movement. And let's look at the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 1968. Now, we're going to get into that a little bit more later down the line, but it's interesting that when Nixon ran his campaign, I will show, there will be part of the material come for next week when we talk civil disobedience, specifically with Martin Luther King. The Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1968 gave a lot of liberties, outlawed essentially making laws that were racist. But I think the question is, did racism just go away? And the answer is no. So, it's interesting to note in the ad that, and we'll get into it again a bit, but history and the repetition of these things, or the continuation is more like it. Civil Rights Act, 1964, 1968. Nixon ran on a campaign of law and order. One of his ads was about a lot of riots that really focused only on black and brown people. A lot of socialism and communist propaganda sort of things connected with that. And then hurt white people. And then said something like, this election, vote like your entire world depended on it. The thought was the status quo was crumbling. It was essentially, if you've ever heard the phrase a dog whistle, it was a dog whistle. The status quo is crumbling. You've just seen the Civil Rights Acts pass. And now there's no law and order. Kind of sound familiar? maybe what's going on right now. But nevertheless, pre-civil rights movements and the Civil Rights Acts, pre-1964, blacks followed the law. But how free were they? How many slaves followed the law? How free were they? See, a successful slave is still a what? So no, I don't think if we're trying to define things like freedom in our country, freedom doesn't equal success. That's not what is being said. So you may say, okay, well, that's our past. All right, we could instead go more modern. Let's get into gay rights. How recently the Supreme Court looked into whether the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects LGBTQ plus workers, meaning they were set to decide on something where the outcome was that you could follow the law and do everything right and not get a job because you were gay or transgender or non-binary or fit in that community. So is that freedom? If that happens, do you have more or less freedom if you're not gay or not part of the LGBTQ plus community? Now, if you noticed, or if you had been keeping track, they actually voted it down and supported LGBTQ workers. It was a big sort of like punch in the face for a lot of conservatives. They could not be discriminated against. So maybe instead we could get into the West Memphis Three. They were just teens that followed the law until they were corralled and harassed into being convicted for the murder of 3 boys without due process because they wore Metallica t-shirts and were into heavy metal in the South, only to have evidence later come out that showed their innocence. And once that new evidence arose, and this is talking 20-some years, it took a further 2 years after their appeal because the state of Alabama and the police department didn't want to look bad. Until eventually, in order to get released, they had to enter what's called an Alford plea deal, which meant even though there was enough evidence to acquit, the state wouldn't allow the acquittal of the trial because it wanted to save face. So instead, in order to be released, the West Memphis Three had to take a guilty plea while still vocalizing their innocence. That's what an Alford plea deal is. You have to admit to guilt, and then you get to say, but I am innocent. I'm only admitting to guilt because of this. And you're charged. You are convicted. But then you're released. But you're still saying, but I'm maintaining my innocence. We could get into, who do we know now? Philando Castile, who had an entire clip of ammunition emptied into him simply for being pulled over for a malfunctioning taillight. And I know, if you know the case, the officer feared for his life because Philando went above and beyond his civic duty and informed the officer that he was carrying a firearm, which he had a permit for. See, this happened in Minnesota. And I think Colorado is similar. Minnesota, though, if you have a permit to carry a firearm, you are not, I repeat, not legally required to tell an officer that you're carrying. It's a courtesy for the officer. And it's a courtesy which Philando Castile extended. His dying words were, "I wasn't reaching for it." All of this happened while his girlfriend and their 4-year-old daughter were in the back seat of the car. His daughter was later recorded telling her mom in the back of the squad car, "Please, Mama, stop screaming. Don't scream. I don't want them to shoot you too." What 4-year-old should be telling that to their parent after their father had just been shot dead in front of them by a police officer? Simply for extending a courtesy of saying, "Officer, I am registered with a firearm, and I have my registered firearm with me." We could talk about Sandra Bland. Died under mysterious circumstances. We could talk about Breonna Taylor. Asleep in her bed. Shot. New evidence has come out that she lay dying for over 5 to 10 minutes without any aid. And it took another 20 minutes for them to even deal with that. The whole no-knock warrant. She was following the law. How free is she now? Free from this mortal coil, I guess. Free from, this world. There are countless others who all have names and stories. So if we go back to that statement, well, if you want freedom, just follow the law. They did. And those countless others out there did too. Are they free? Is that freedom? Well, if you want freedom, you just have to follow the law. That statement is the equivalent to an abusive partner saying, well, if you don't want me to beat you, you'll do what I say. Just do what I say. Which tells me that if you're making that statement, if you want freedom, you just have to follow that law. The law of our country. If you're making that statement, I don't know. That's for you to understand and really question, but it seems like somewhere inside you may just believe that there are actually human beings out there who do, in fact, deserve abuse, deserve to get beat, and maybe not in the fun, consensual way. It's another thing. And this is where we're going with this, because if you're one of those people, I think, and then you enter into a privileged position of power, who stops you? Wow, that's quite a start to that afternoon special. For access to the full video, or to get the full course, or just support me making new content that has everything or nothing to do with what you just watched, head on over to my Patreon, link in the bio. Join the community. I'd love to see you there and have you become a part of something bigger than me, but something where I can play my part just the same. See you there.